Welcome back to another installment of the Copper Club podcast, where we're back with more transfer talk. Myself and Peter Pankovski will go through the latest rumours ahead of the transfer window. And for advocates of the Copper Club podcast, look, first of all, thank you very much. You've probably seen us do a lot more transfer work across YouTube, and we're going to be doing a lot more sporadic episodes across Apple and Spotify throughout the summer transfer window. So don't worry, we'll still keep our domestic podcasts around the Libertadores, Brazilian football, etc. with Callum Goodall, but we will be jumping on and covering as many good, solid links as possible and profiling the players. And there's a few we want to go through today. Peter, we'll start with the first one where, again, Nottingham Forest seem to be dipping their toes back into the Brazilian market, but West Ham also rumoured to be keen on the player. Not 100% sure who's the closest at the moment, but obviously West Ham are trying to make a splash in the Brazilian market, been linked with a couple of players and obviously bringing in Luis Guilherme. We've done an episode on that for those who want to catch up on him. But the latest link, International's 24-year-old centre-back, Vitao, who he has a nice profile, doesn't he, Peter? He's not quite the Murillo level. That's the first question I want to sort of address, because that's the ones which I'm being asked left, right and centre on Twitter. But he's got a nice profile, hasn't he, in terms of how he is as a footballer, especially on the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. He's one of those new gen centre backs I love to talk about, where they're very tall, they're very physical, and at the same time you're saying, oh, okay, so no nonsense defending from Brazil. That's what we expect. And then you see him ping balls, trying to switch flanks and so on, and everybody's wow and is amazed, and we're playing all this possession type football with him. But yeah, I'm not surprised, honestly. I think the one good thing that I'll just side topic highlight with Brazil is these days I find a lot of players who before wouldn't get the necessary praise that they so rightfully deserve, get their moves to lower tier European sides. And we'll get to Vitao's in a minute, but it's just players like him nowadays, with Carlos Miguel as well, and others also have kind of moved to various clubs around Europe, especially England, who didn't used to touch them with a barge pole, and now we see this highly analytical approach of players of his stature, for example, tall, very physical centre back, as I mentioned, but very agile at the same time, move and potentially be kind of a like-for-like replacement for Willy Bolly, for example, or Kurt Zuma at West Ham. Like, depend on where he lands.
Sure.
I'm actually quite impressed, because to me it does seem like nice fits for either of the two sides.
Yeah, and the rumoured fee, obviously we won't get bogged down in that, but around £3 or £4 million, it makes it a nice, easy gamble. And we've said a few times on the podcast, like, when can any team go anywhere across Europe and find a player of this sort of technical ability? I think that's what we need to touch on with Vitao. I think he is tall. I had a few people pop up onto a few of my tweets and say, oh, well, his aerial percentages all aren't that good, but they actually outranked Murillo when I had a little bit deeper across all competitions in 2023. So I think you can always take those with a pinch of salt. But like you said, I think he is quite good in the air. He scored a few goals during his time with Internacional, has proved a threat. Now, if you're a threat in the opponent's box, which would be, from a Forest point of view, a huge tick, because Nottingham Forest didn't really have too much of a threat from set pieces, conceded plenty, but never really scored any either. But Vitao's movement in the box was very good. And from set pieces, he has actually shown to be fairly strong in terms of, look, Internacional reached the semi-finals of the Libertadores last campaign. It's not a competition you can sort of squeeze through if you don't defend well throughout that competition. I do have a negative part from that, because before we jumped onto this podcast, I decided to go through each and every goal Internacional conceded in the 2023 Libertadores, and one or two, potentially there was a lapse of concentration from Vitao. Obviously, I'm going to be more critical if I'm looking at Internacional's conceding goals, but it was mainly other people putting him at fault throughout, especially when it was an open play. So again, Forest fans may be a bit hesitant to be like, oh God, don't want anyone who's going to switch off defensively at the back. There were a couple of moments there which were potentially a cause for concern. But overall, as you said there, he is aerially strong, especially in play. Okay, but he likes to pick up the ball from the back and almost plays as that anchor. And as you said, that sort of modern Brazilian centre-back who can switch the play is almost as good as a defensive midfielder 5-10 years ago. If a defender can have that in his locker, and yes, we're still not sure if Murillo is going to be on the move, but as a right-sided centre-back operating with Murillo there, you've got two players who like to get on the ball and can play out from the back. Now in the Premier League, to have one in your starting 11 is almost the perfect fit. To have two could really be quite exciting. So there's that angle from it. And obviously we don't know still whether the Forest link is entirely accurate or whether he's going to be going to West Ham. But clearly he's impressing enough there in terms of what he's been delivering in Brazil. But look, he's also had Champions League and Europa League experience with Shakhtar. So it's not like it's going to be completely new to him, which again is another pleasing part of his game that, yes, he's 24, it's still fairly young, got experience, but has experience playing in Europe as well. So surely, Peter, that puts him in good stead.
Yeah, I was going to get to the Shakhtar move as well because I feel like he just didn't settle to Ukraine. Also, the war kind of changed a lot of these foreign players who used to be very kind of on board with going to Ukraine to now being displeased and leaving. We all know what happened there. So I know that he's got a bit less than 30 appearances for Shakhtar. I think maybe just above those. I think he was there for 2 seasons or so, maybe 2.5, something like that. And he's been on loan to Internacional since. And people may look on that and say, okay, he flopped at Shakhtar. Why would we want the typical term being a Shakhtar reject or some sort of other team? And I kind of understand that in a sense, maybe. And I do also have a bit of a knock on him. I think as much as for his size, the spread of his legs is very kind of huge because he just got such a long length.
Yeah.
But the fact that he goes to ground a bit too often is one thing that scares me a little bit. It would be one where if you combine that with a lapse of concentration, if he then desires to go and use his recovery speed or just recovering his position via his size and stature, I think going to ground quickly could cause a little bit of a concern, especially with teams who are and players who are much more dynamic compared to what you usually get in Brazil, much more athletic, much quicker off the ball and on it. So that's my personal negative with him. Other than that, in terms of his European experience, I'd say so. I think as much as people like to knock down these types of players, you forget cases, especially maybe even you could point way back to Thiago Silva, who came to Europe, didn't perform well, came back to Brazil, and then became one of the best defenders to ever grace football. So I think as much as, and this is not me saying Vitao will be the next Thiago Silva, but nothing for that price of what, again, 3 to 3.5 million pounds, you're not going to get that much from, even if you don't get that much from him in these days of football, that's just not that big of a loss, especially when you need depth at the position. So I'd say it's rather risk-free. Expectations on him will be less as well. So it does, as I said, it's a nice pick. I wouldn't go too far as praising it because obviously he need the time, he need to adjust. It's the Premier League at the end of the day, best league in the world. So he'll need his time to adjust to it. But you wouldn't lose too much by signing a Vitao to your squad. Not at all, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I think you've put it very well. It is a almost slightly calculated risk. If you, like I said, I went back through a lot. Thing is, in the Sudamericana this year, he's actually been rather strong, and with Internacional, there's a good project going on there at the moment over the last 18 months. Yes, they didn't qualify for the Libertadores last year, but the money they've spent and the players they've brought in this year, and Vitao's very much been a part of that. It's only because of the horrific floods in the south of Brazil, which has sort of hindered their calendar at the moment, which is probably why we haven't seen them as much. But in his last game against Delfin in the Sudamericana, probably one of the man of the match, to be honest with you, but he was playing against, yes, an inferior side, and that's where he can act again as that anchor, as I called him earlier, and ping balls and sort of like stand and have that authority at the back, and it was very much there for you to see. But it is that lapse of concentration where, look, he is pacey. That has bailed him out a few times. And I did say that in my negative thoughts when I went through the Libertadores highlights this morning, when they did get knocked out to Fluminense, when they conceded 2 late goals, he has tried to... It was an odd decision because it was 10 minutes... around the 80th minute mark, and Internacional winning 1-0, so obviously they're getting a little bit deeper, and Fluminense putting the press on, and obviously we know from people who've been on the podcast before, Fluminense play a fluid formation, but he's been pulled out of position trying to win a ball away from Marcelo, which he was never really going to get, and Marcelo, obviously a very intelligent footballer, has let the ball roll through to John Kennedy, and the rest is history. And all of a sudden he's been pulled out of position there, and that's potentially a weakness from him, and that will be really highlighted in the Premier League if he makes one or two of those. So that adjustment period, it will be interesting to see if he comes across. But I don't want to paint him out to be a completely negative footballer, like we said here, in terms of he's very good on the ball, he's quick, he is better than the air than a lot of people are saying. I wouldn't read too much into his stats from what I've seen over the last 18 months. It'd just be a case of if he does make an error or two. I think if he does go to Nottingham Forest, because of the amount of goals they conceded last season, especially from set pieces and players switching off in play, that'll be highlighted more by fans than anyone else. So that would be a slight cause for concern. But as you said, Championship, if you look at it, Championship players you can't get for 3-4 million at the moment. If you look at exits, Joe Worrell will be potentially on his way out for a similar fee, and I know exactly who I'd prefer, someone who has that experience in the Champions League, Europa League, but also a high level in Brazil as well. And I think people underestimate the importance of the Libertadores and even the Sudamericana and the pressure and the crowds they play under. That takes a lot as well, especially I'd like to see potentially Joe Worrell coping at El Monumento against River Plate. Do you know what I mean? So it's there's ways to look at it. So yes, the standard wouldn't be there. There's not me. I'm not necessarily slating Joe Worrell, but it's like the standard may not be there in every single match, but the pressure and the crowds to perform, like I think that shows a mentality. So for me,
yeah, people definitely undermine that. I'm sorry for cutting you off, but people definitely undermine that. Absolutely. I've highlighted with numerous youngsters, obviously Chelsea signing every single youngster from Brazil and the living embodiment of transfers. But it's just when you're growing up 90% of the time or 99% of the time under pressure, especially when it comes to just stepping on a football pitch and every single person on that football pitch is either praising you or hating you and stating your every single move, and then you times that by at least 40,000 at least, then you're brought up, because people in Brazil, or even in this case we're talking about Vitao, but we can make the case for Argentina, Bolivia, everywhere. People in South America just love their football. They go to a lot of youth games. Yes, maybe the youth games aren't as high pressure, but as you mentioned, that builds up mentality and confidence to handle the biggest moments. Yeah, sometimes people fall under those expectations. Yes, that's just normal. That's human nature at the end of the day. Some are cut for it, some are not. But with a lot of these young Brazilians, they're just brought up in a way that they have to absorb all of that in order to make it. And if you, especially when you consider also their private life, living in well, I wouldn't call them, well, in the favelas, most of them that is, and they want to get out of there as well. It just builds up mentality. I always point to the NFL. It's always like that. It's the rough upbringing that also shapes the player. So to just back up your point on Joe Worrell, it's not a statement. Joe Worrell is just saying, in the biggest moments, you'd probably trust a Vitao a little bit more than Joe Worrell, just because, and this is no knock on Joe Worrell's personal life or anything, but Vitao's seen some stuff. I'm 90% certain of that compared to Joe Worrell.
Yeah, exactly. And look, 24, he's still young. He's got the experience there. And I just think it's important to note when these players come over, because everyone straight away just looks at their physique and goes, oh, well, he's a bit slender. He won't be able to cope with that. But sometimes it's much more than just your physical appearances when it comes to these sort of things. So mentality key here. And look, that could be a huge part of Vitao's game if he adjusts to the Premier League. But if West Ham want him as well as Nottingham Forest, then he must be doing something right. So a lot of positives, but it's always important just to notify anything we've seen over the last 18 months in his game, which could be a hindrance. We're not just here to always cheerlead players, but a player I know you definitely want to cheerlead. We'll move on to our second player, is Pedro Lima from Sport Recife, who's on his way to Strasbourg, part of the Blue Co sort of project. So obviously a pipeline for Chelsea. And anyone who hasn't listened to the podcast before, Peter is a Serie B expert. He's probably watched more Serie B games than I'd like to probably know, to be honest with you. So he knows very much the standard there. And look, players aren't normally picked from Serie B. Like there's a huge golfing quality between Serie B to Serie A, which is potentially surprising why everyone was making a huge song dance about this 17-year-old high-flying right-back, Pedro Lima. And we know Premier League teams now, or European teams, are buying promise rather than people who have proved themselves nowadays, almost taking that chance. And Yeah, he's a player I've seen once or twice. I won't lie to you. Since his name started popping up in the Chelsea links, I thought I'd best tune in for a game or two. But look, Peter, I know Serie B expert, and also it'd be good to see whether he does stand out. And would he? I'm not going to ask you the question of if he's going to fulfil that promise, because that's a generic question, and we're not here for that on the podcast. But in terms of, you watch a lot of Serie B football, and now you've seen Pedro Lima, like, is he the real deal? Is he a real talent with potential, that ability to take it to the next level in your eyes?
Oh, yeah, well, when it comes to Chelsea, that obviously a huge step in itself. But I do agree he's actually a very, very interesting talent. Absolutely, I can't. The fact that the last three players that have come from Serie B football to kind of graze, whether it be Brazil Serie A and then earn a quick move to Europe, and will eventually, I'm putting him in that spot as well. The other two being Andre Santos and Vitor Roque, it kind of bodes well for him to be in that company,
Yeah,
because as you mentioned, Serie B football, it's very poor. Like I have an ongoing joke with a couple of Brazilian mates that there's no way a guy from Bulgaria watches Serie B football, and I keep posting saying, "But this was once upon a time the way I earned my money." So
we are a
look,
niche podcast. People
yeah.
know that.
But yeah, it was very needed. So yes, Jess, and there's also another, my friend Gabriel from Rio. So yes, I do unfortunately watch Serie B when they say, "Oh, you poor thing." But
You get to discover talents like Pedro Lima once in a
exactly,
blue moon.
exactly. And no, the Andre Santos one was my pride and joy, honestly, because the moment I grazed my eyes on him, I was like, "Yeah, I love you. You're going right to the very top."
And do you
But
think it's sort of similar vibes here with Pedro Lima? Maybe not on the same scale, but again, a player who's stood out for
oh
really
yeah,
impressing.
absolutely. Absolutely. Considering the fact that last year he was only making bench appearances, I believe, for Sport Recife, and that was just getting him here and there, but he never got to taste senior football with Recife, I believe. I'm pretty sure he didn't. I'm
Yeah, and this
99.9%.
season
And
already
this season
on 10
suddenly they
games
just
plus. Yeah,
they just had the chance to give him a spot, and he grabbed it with both hands. I'm just so well. I am very impressed with him. I do have my own concerns with him, and I'll get to that. But I'm very impressed because at that age, in a tough league that is Serie B, as much as I've stated it and said it's poor, yes, it is poor, but it's very tough. When it comes to Serie A, you say it's physical, but Serie B is even worse. Serie B is kind of semi-amateurish in a way because it's just so tough sometimes when you see the opposition you face and kind of the tackles that fly in left and right, and you're scared for players' health. But at the same time, there's also moments of brilliance, and I I'd compare it to the Balkan leagues, if I'm honest, with like Bulgaria, Slovenia, Slovakia, and so on. Those are the types of league I compare Serie B to in terms of level of talent. Yes, obviously those will probably churn out more European talent on a regular basis, but those are like their first divisions compared to the second division of Brazil. But as I said, he's a very technical, young, modest kind of fullback. I love the fact that he's very confident on the ball, and at the same time, I hate it, if I'm honest, because sometimes he just keeps it too much, and he has this overconfidence in his dribbling ability that will sometimes get, and especially at higher level,
hmm
will probably get him into bad spots. Like I'm 100% certain of that because oftentimes he just I wouldn't say forgets, but he doesn't want to release the ball on time when there are passing options. And I understand that perhaps he believes in his own talent to progress the ball further forward. And that's fantastic for a right back because these days we see all of this with the inverted fullbacks slotting into midfield or just overlapping, and that because the right winger or left winger or whoever has just created the space for him to exploit. And that's great. Yes, absolutely it is. But at the same time, this happens at Serie B and you're still 17. So there's still time to kind of hone all of that into one perfect, you'd say, gem in order to reap the maximum benefits of Lima.
and he's probably trying to, just, sorry to cut you off there, but he's almost trying a little bit too hard at times because he probably has a lot of faith and knows within his ability. I mean, that's what I definitely caught from him in a couple of games I've seen him, in terms of like almost doesn't trust the other teammates around him who are more experienced pros, 25 plus, especially in Serie B. He's very much like, I want to spend as much time in that final third as possible. And if I am going to play somebody inside the box, I'm immediately looking for that 1-2. I want a goal. I want an assist. Where that can all be molded in time. But even to me, it stood out in terms of how much he was demanding the ball and wanting to progress the pitch. And this is a right back. We're not talking about a young right winger where you'd expect that, or a striker or attacking mid, whatever. But he was very much there, again, operating in that final third. Even if you go through a few of his highlight reels, which I have been guilty of going on, so I'm not going to claim too much there. But I was just looking and I was trying to figure out what position he was playing in certain games, because he was drifting into the middle. It was almost as if he was playing for under Denise at Fluminense.
Yeah, he had also, I believe at youth level, he has one goal where I think he intercepts the ball in kind of the middle pitch of his own area, and then he just scrambles that, like passes one person, second person, then just pops the ball right behind the whole of the defense, outruns them. And I think either he laid it up or he scored himself, but it was just like, wow, okay. I mean, if you can do that, why are you even playing at the right back? But he's actually a very classy right back. I guess offensively,
there's raw talent there, isn't there? I think that's
absolutely.
That's the difference. That's what we need to spot here before we start going, oh, well, he needs to do this, he needs to do that. At this stage of his career and where he is with the club, it's all about going, has he got the raw talent and the ability to take it to the next level? And then a project like Strasbourg, which probably could be a good link. People outside of Chelsea and Blue Co and stuff will probably completely disagree, but the chance to go there, test himself and work his way up, it's quite pleasing to see from my point of view, rather than going, well, he needs to sign for a big club straight away and then doesn't settle in and then on the bench and then finds himself back in Brazil. It's quite a good sort of pathway that Chelsea are building, really, to be honest with you. You only have to look at Andre Santos. Okay, look, Forest didn't want him, but he ended up there anyway. Didn't play, then was getting a bit berated by, is he even that good? Stuff like that. Then goes to Strasbourg and then showcases his ability. And then Chelsea have announced that he's going to be in the squad this season. So Strasbourg could be the perfect stepping stone. We saw with Angelo as well. Like, okay, look, maybe he may not be a Chelsea regular, but he went there and thrived. And it's all about the environment. And if Brazilians feel welcome there, and there's that sort of mini contingency, whether it's Chelsea players feeding South Americans or them buying them directly, that building that little culture can help them sort of develop into European football. So I think the case with Pedro Lima, from my point of view, is going, has he got the raw talent? Yes. Then let's expose him to a higher league in Europe before potentially progressing him to Chelsea. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think from one point I can say that I'm very happy if he goes to Strasbourg. So reason being is, it's a bit of a conspiracy theory here, but I think kind of the Strasbourg and Blue co-ownership type thing and whatever with Chelsea is, they're going to attempt, at least in my eyes from what I'm seeing in terms of recruitment, they're going to attempt to kind of both teams to play a similar level of style, and in order to kind of develop certain players to fit the modern day objectives of what football is expecting of you. And whether that be for Chelsea per se, in order for them to be used in the first team as a regular or not, it doesn't really matter. Or they're sold for a profit. Either way, the players will know and will be accustomed to these types of roles, as I said, that would be normal to them and would therefore thrive in any different environment to that of Strasbourg and Chelsea. Now, in terms of the move itself, also I believe it makes absolute sense. He's still 17. He will move to Europe and potentially play at a lower level than what a lot of these young Brazilian talents would usually. But again, he is coming from Serie B, meaning that he will need time to adjust. However, if Angelo Gabriel is also loaned there, which is a great thing, he'll probably will settle along with another Brazilian teammate, which will make his life a little bit easier to get to Europe and subsequently settle in. So in all kind of, if I have to, because I've come before on the podcast and I've kind of shared my doubts about signing certain players and Chelsea's just recruitment policy in general, I would say this is probably what you would want in terms of signing a talent of Pedro Lima's, I wouldn't say level, but the caliber, and subsequently how to develop him. Because I think, and obviously for the price as well, I think they're going to pay around 12 million euros plus the add-ons, if I'm not mistaken. But that's, in this day, again, pretty much chump change for what you say.
Yeah.
And even if he doesn't ever play for Chelsea, if he plays well enough, he will likely get sold on a potential profit. We've seen it with City, we've seen it with Red Bull, and other multi-club models are based like slightly off that. It's not. It's. I know people are very against these. I am in a sense myself, but these days it's just how football is, and if you want to enjoy it, you just have to be oblivious to some of these stuff. And also, mind you, Reece James, as much as I love Reece James, for example, for Chelsea, if you want to throw it back to Chelsea and themselves and why they're buying another right back when they already have Malo Gusto and Reece James has had his fitness issues. If Chelsea deem that to be too much of an issue, or he carries on being in and out with a lot of problems, then if Pedro Lima develops, why not just ping him back to Chelsea for? He's going to be on loan anyways. So, and then you have.
It makes sense the more you explain it. I think when people just first of all say, here we go, here's the link with Blue Co and Pedro Lima and stuff. But it does seem to make a fair bit of sense, to be honest with you. And look, if we just strip it back down again, the player profile, he's raw, he's exciting, and he's standing out in Serie B, and it ticks a lot of boxes. So one to get excited about. And look, apologies to any Rangers fans who've had to wait 25 minutes before we've got to the Damián García section, but it's definitely worth the wait. So Damián García heavily linked with a move from Penarol to Rangers, and look, it might even happen by the time this podcast goes out. Hopefully not. But look, just turn the 20-year-old who has a really interesting profile, to be honest with you. And look, part of that, I think it was a year ago yesterday or a year ago this week that Uruguay under 20s won the World Cup. He started 6 of those 7 games and came on as a substitute in the other. He's been a huge part of Penarol's midfield and have qualified for the Libertadores knockout stage for the first time, I believe, since 2013, 2014, a team who have really struggled in this competition to get further than the group stage. Continuously been in it, but never really got out of it. And we're in quite a tough group as well, with the likes of Atletico Mineiro. I think there was Caracas and someone else who I completely forgot whilst I'm going through my little rant. But as a number 6 on this podcast, okay, look, if anyone's tuned in before, Peter, Cal, and I try to identify as many number 6s. I don't know if we do it on purpose anymore, but it's just players who we naturally are drawn to. And I think Damián García. We are, but this is another player who gets us excited. And if we're getting excited by another number 6, I think it's important to have a look at him. So, look, operates in that quarterback role. I've made notes here in terms of how he's comfortable with both of his feet. He loves a diagonal switch. I think even people can just go onto his highlight reel and see that, to be honest. But it's his bread and butter. He's always looking to switch the play. And it's almost like it fits the Bielsa model, because obviously Bielsa's coming as the Uruguay manager. He's operating all levels from sort of under 18 up. So he's having his influence there. And if we watch Uruguay's recent friendly against Mexico, they're looking to always utilize the wingers and spread the play. So I'm not even sure if there's a link there, but as I started to speak about it, it seemed to sort of fit the mold of Bielsa and what he's demanding. And look, Uruguay going into Copa America as a huge, I was going to say huge favourites, a huge chance to go and win that. So if you fit in that model, again, he ticks a lot of boxes, and he rarely goes to ground, which is another huge tick for a number 6 in terms of, look, we spoke previously about Oscar Zambrano and Andre and how they excel in that role, because they're looking to nick the ball back from either behind or just anticipating exactly where the pass is going to go to, and that teammate, the opposing teammate, to win the ball back and progress an attacking position. He's not there to win you goals. He's not going to get you assists. Those stats are always going to be around 0 or 1, but he's there to break the play up and put the ball into the final third, where players are then going to, your wingers or attacking players, have room to sort of attack. And the fact that, look, Rangers, this is not the first South American link with Rangers. I think we need to sort of flag that. There's been a fair few. So obviously they're moving into that market, and fair play to them. Look, Rangers haven't got the same budgets as Premier League teams. For them to go out and spend 2, 3, 4 million is a lot of money for them. But still, like, this link has really surprised me, and it's really impressed me, to be honest. If we look at other profiles in that under 20 Uruguay side who have then gone on to make moves, obviously Fabrizio Diaz was linked with Barcelona and ended up in Qatar, which was highly disappointing. Hopefully we get to see him in Europe soon. But Luciano Rodriguez, the guy who scored the winner, he's going to move from Liverpool to Girona and pretty much be Savio's replacement. So look, there's a lot of key players there who are being picked. I'm almost surprised that there hasn't been as many within the last year, to be honest with you. A few have gone across to Europe. But look, Garcia deserves his opportunity, and Penarol fans are very every time I've sort of tweeted about him or seen reports, they're very angry that he's on his way out, which again is another huge tick for Rangers fans to suggest that they've got a player on their hands. So look, Pete, have you seen much of Garcia? Do you sort of echo my thoughts? Are you excited by him?
Just barely from when we announced, obviously, from the ones I've seen from Penarol, obviously, which are not much, but I can probably count them on one hand. That's about it. Other than that, obviously, when we said we were going to do a show about him, I did my research as well. And it was good. The moment you said just loves to ping ball forwards, I smiled. That just because of that, like his highlight reel was 70% that, which was it was very good to see. I honestly, after the whole speech you just made, I feel like even if I say something, I'm just going to be blabbering. So I'd rather ask you something, if anything. Like, do you feel like he has any certain weaknesses to his game?
Do you know what? It's bold for me to say no, because the first question's asked away from the technical ability, and I think look, he has a ceiling there, to be honest with you. So maybe look, that's his weakness in terms of operating as a number 6. Like I said, he's not going to get you goals, he's not going to get you assists, he's not going to be the assist for the assist, as we sometimes see when I've named Oscar Zambrano, who was another player linked with Rangers in the last window. He is capable of that. He's more breaking up the play. So look, I think there's a ceiling as to like his technical ability. But what I really like for his age is that the mentality he has. He's very much, the word thrown about has been leader around Garcia, and I only have to echo that, to be honest with you. For such a young age, I'm almost surprised that Rangers have been able to convince him and get him over. I do think in 12 months' time he will be taking another leap forward. I'm convinced of it. I think there's a lot of players in that Uruguay under 20 side who probably should have kicked on by now and haven't. And I think the fact that he's been able to boss the midfield for Penarol, a big club in South America, and one who normally don't tend to lean on too many youngsters. If not, maybe that's where they've gone wrong in the past in terms of in the Copa Libertadores. But he's come in, started every game, made that position his own, and other senior players are looking to him when it comes to guidance on the pitch sometimes, which I think, look, if you go make a drastic comparison, but you look at Jude Bellingham for England at times, like a lot of more senior players sometimes are looking at him because of, and even for Real Madrid in the way he's sort of stamping his authority on the game. And this isn't me saying Garcia is anything like Bellingham, but if you're looking at the mentality and how they conduct themselves on the pitch, I think that goes a long way, especially when you move across to a demanding league and a demanding club like Rangers, where you're expected to almost win every game. And going into that, there's a lot of pressure when it comes to Rangers, but in a different capacity compared to, I was going to say different capacity compared to Penarol. But look, there's expectations for Penarol domestically every single match. It's the Libertadores, which is potentially a little bit different, where expectations are ever so slightly lower, just purely because it's been a decade before they've reached the knockout. So it's a shame that if this deal does go through, from a selfish point of view, that we won't see the true Penarol in the knockout stage, because he's such a huge influence on that midfield. So, but again, a really good pickup by Rangers if this happens. I'm not sure on the rumoured fee. I don't think it's more than a few million if that goes through, because his contract's almost set to expire soon. But I feel like if he has a good season in Scotland, that he can progress in the next 12 months to another club, whether that's in England. Sorry to ruffle Rangers fans already, saying that a player you're getting excited about could be on the move. But look, such is football. The one question I wanted to address and finish with that is, and we've seen it time and time again with a few South Americans who go north across the border from England into Scotland, is the weather and the climate. Now, look, I'm no weatherman and I'm no expert, but recently, having spent time in South America and only being 30 minutes away on a boat from Uruguay in Buenos Aires, I can let you know now that it was absolutely Baltic. So I think people think South America is this hot, warm climate all the time. It is definitely not the case. So it's more to do probably with the culture side of things than the weather. But these are the questions that get asked, which I suppose are fair. But trust me, Uruguay can also be bloody freezing as well. So that wouldn't be a concern of mine. And I think to wrap it up, I honestly think out of the three we've spoken about, I think he's the one who's the most ready, to be honest with you, to make a point and make a statement in Europe. Vitao obviously more experienced, but I think more people will be impressed when Damián García comes off. So look, sometimes we finish this podcast on a negative note, but we're finishing it on a positive. So I think it's best to wrap it up there. If you've enjoyed the episode, please do like, subscribe, follow us on any platform. It helps us to grow and continue doing as many episodes as possible. But look, Peter, thank you for your time once again.
As always, a pleasure. You know it.